Let's start with tackles for loss. It's Myles Garrett already for Cleveland. 6 tackles for loss. He's looked very impressive. He's definitely going to be a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. Today, we're going to be looking at the standings and the statistics for week 2 and for the season. So this week, we can compile a couple of weeks of information, see what we come up with. Obviously, as we go along, it'll become a little firmer about team situations and so forth. But we do have a little start here with this, the standings and the statistics. And then we will also look at the fantasy numbers, see who's standing out in that category. We'll cover all that today on this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So let's get started. We'll start with our standings, and we'll start with American Football Conference, AFC. In the East, Buffalo Bills, 2-0, 2 wins, 0 losses. New England, 1-1, and Jets and Dolphins, 0-2. The Jets, I thought, would put up a better fight against Buffalo. They did not. They looked bad. So right now, that's where we stand. Buffalo's already got 2-0, and they're 1-0 in the division. So is New England. So it's going to be tough to knock Buffalo out of that spot. I don't see it happening. I thought there could be a chance this year, even though it was small, but we'll see. It's still early. It's only 2 games, but Buffalo looks pretty good. In the North, AFC North, Cincinnati, unbelievably, 2 very ugly wins. In fact, they've scored 48 points. They've given up 43. That tells you how close the 2 games were. But they're 2-0. Baltimore Ravens, 1-1. Pittsburgh Steelers are 1-1, and Cleveland Browns 0-2. And Cincinnati Bengals are 1-0 in the division, as is the Baltimore Ravens. Cincinnati cannot keep, and now with can't keep winning this way. And with Burrow out, Browning in, I don't see them holding on to this lead. I don't even think they'll end up actually making the playoffs. We'll see. But I do fully expect for Baltimore to come tearing through this division at some point. Looking at the South, Indianapolis Colts are 2-0. Jacksonville Jaguars are 1-1, and the Texans and the Titans are 0-2. So no one's played a division game, but that changes this coming weekend. Jaguars will be playing the Texans, and the Colts, I believe, are playing the Titans, if I'm correct on that one. But Indianapolis Colts look really good. Daniel Jones has looked incredible at this point. So they are 2-0, and they really have dominated. I mean, their points for are 62. Their points against are only 36. So they're winning these games handily. While the Jaguars should be 2-0 as well, but they gave that game away to Cincinnati with only 18 seconds to go in the game. I still haven't gotten over it. They were winning the entire game. And, I don't care about the so-called bad call or whatever. Jaguars offensive line and offense made so many mistakes. They could have won this game easily. It's just incredible the amount of drops. Brian Thomas is mentally handicapped right now. We'll see what's going on with him. And the coach was giving coach speak. Trying to take some of the pressure off of him, but right now he's got to figure out what's going on. I had wondered why the Jaguars passed the ball so much, because they were winning the entire game, and the idea was to bank on this running game, which did rack up 200 yards last game and almost had 150 in this game, but still, come to find out, Trevor Lawrence makes some calls at the line of scrimmage, and he was opting out of run plays and going for the pass. So that's kind of a questionable on my mind, that Trevor Lawrence would do that when the running game had been so good, especially on One of the big plays was a 3rd and 2 inside the 50-yard line of the other team. You could run it twice if you wanted to for 2 yards. I think they would have got it. They ran well over 5 yards a carry in the game. So just a rough game. But anyway, enough of that. Jaguars 1-1, Indianapolis Colts 2-0, and they look like they'll probably be 3-0 for sure. Jaguars and Houston Texans have a tough one. Houston Texans, who won the division the last few years, 0-2, they really need this win. It is in Jacksonville. So if they do not get this win and they go 0-3, they're going to be in tough shape. Now in the West, the Chargers 2-0, Raiders 1-1, Denver Broncos 1-1, and the Kansas City Chiefs, who have won this division several years in a row, are 0-2. Chargers have a good hold on this division already. They're 2-0, and both their wins are in the division. They've already beat the Raiders and Chiefs, so they look really good. 2 competitive games, and they do look good. Denver, a shocking loss last week. I didn't expect to see them lose that game, but they're 1-1. So Kansas City isn't out of it, but they're going to have to do something here soon. I know they get Worthy back. I believe that'll help them some because they're Hollywood Brown and Smith-Schuster just not cutting it. Thornton is the only guy, but they need some help. You can't have Mahomes being your leading running back or your leading rusher. He can't do that for 16, 17 games without ultimately getting hurt and ending his season. It's just too much for him to have to play every offensive player on, other than the line. He needs some help. All right, let's look at the National Football Conference, NFC, starting in the East. Philadelphia Eagles 2-0. Commanders are 1-1. Dallas Cowboys 1-1, and Giants 0-2. That was quite a game. The Giants really, I thought, could have won that game. Too many times in the first quarter, kicking field goals, they really should have went for it. On at least one of those, went for the 4th down conversion to keep the ball and not kick the field goal. But Wilson had 450 yards passing, so big game for him. But they ended up actually still losing to the Cowboys. Rough game there for them as well. So now you have the Eagles. I think they'll dominate. Right now, they're 1-0 in the division, as are the Commanders 1-0 in the division. Dallas Cowboys are 1-1, and Giants. It's going to be a long season, I believe. They're 0-2, but they did put up a good fight in that game, so they may be able to upset somebody once in a while. But it looks like the Eagles right now. We'll have to see for the Commanders the situation with Daniels and his sprained knee and how long, if he's out at all, and how long. Now in the North, Green Bay Packers are 2-0. Minnesota Vikings 1-1. Detroit Lions 1-1, and the Bears are 0-2, which is kind of the way it looked like it would be. Though I do think ultimately the Lions will put some pressure on the Packers. But right now, the Packers look really good. Their defenses looked outstanding, and their offenses looked good as well. So they're going to be tough to beat in this division. They're 1-0 in the division, as in Minnesota, which is why they're over Detroit, who is 1-1 in the division. And the Bears are 0-2 already. Now, South, Tampa Bay, Buccaneers 2-0, Atlanta Falcons 1-1, and the Saints and the Panthers are 0-2. Tampa Bay already is 1-0 in the division, and the Falcons, they're 1-1, but they are 0-1 in the division. Buccaneers came back and won a game last weekend. It was a big game for them. And right now it's going to be the Falcons. Falcons look good. They're 1-1, but they did look good. Their offense, they can run the ball, and if they have a lead, it's going to be hard to stop them. When you have 2 outstanding running backs, really, it's just tough for anybody to stop them. And Tampa Bay obviously has a good team as well. The Saints were very competitive, just could not win the game, played well, but in a losing effort. Now in the West, this is quite a division here. This is going to be quite a contest. The 49ers, the Cardinals, and the Rams are all 2-0. The Seattle Seahawks are 1-1. Now the 49ers ended up beating Seattle earlier, and they're 2-0 and they're 1-0 in the division, while the Seahawks are 0-1 in the division, and the Cardinals and Rams haven't played a division game yet, but they will be. So that's a very competitive division. I do not know, honestly. It looks like the Rams, as long as Stafford's healthy, they have a decent defense. They've only given up 28 points. And if their offense can come around a little bit more with the running game, they could be difficult to beat. Arizona, I don't know how much of their game and the 49ers is smoke and mirrors or for real. They're very similar in some of their numbers, but we'll see. So that's a look at the standings right now. Let's see, you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 undefeated teams. See how long, who is the last team to be standing with undefeated record. All right, let's move on to the statistical leaders. This last week, we'll start with the quarterbacks. Well, it was Russell Wilson, threw for 450 yards. While in the same game, Dak Prescott threw for 361 yards. Those were the top two quarterbacks as far as yards go. That was an unbelievable game to watch. I mean, that's 811 yards in passing yards, not even counting the rushing. So those two led the NFL in passing yards. There were 6 quarterbacks that threw for over 300 yards this week. Last week, the first week, it was a little bit rough for the quarterbacks. But this week, you did have some big games. Looking at the touchdowns, Jared Goff, who did throw for 334 yards, threw for 5 touchdowns. Pretty impressive. Lamar Jackson threw for 4 on much less numbers. He only had 19 completions. Actually, Jared Goff only had 23 completions. Very efficient, both of them, but Goff was 23 completions on 28 attempts with 5 touchdowns, neither one through an interception. So really big games there. And then looking at, unfortunately, in the interception department, that was Jake Browning. Now for him, he was fortunate. He threw 3 interceptions in 2.5 quarters or so and still pulled the game out and won the game for Cincinnati. On the other hand, Geno Smith threw 3 interceptions, and they ended up losing handily 20-9 to the Chargers. I mentioned this earlier, but Smith, he looked really good the week 1, but then this week he just seems to decide, I'm just heaving the ball and I hope my guy gets it, and it did not happen that way. So he did have a rough game, and we'll look at his quarterback rating, who was the worst of the quarterback rating. But looking at sacks, J.J. McCarthy was sacked 6 times to lead. This is just in one game, remember. 6 sacks. Tua Tagovailoa was sacked 5 times, as was Cam Ward. So you see that Tua should not be getting sacked 5 times. He has a quick release. Now, they did throw the ball down the field a little more than they had been. I guess they were trying to get out of that dink and dunk type of situation, which may have led to the 5 sacks. But Cam Ward and McCarthy, they're rookies. McCarthy's not technically a rookie, but he didn't play last year. So it's a little more understandable that they would have 5 sacks. But they led the NFL in that number. Now, Jared Goff led the NFL almost a perfect pass quarterback rating of 156. Like I said, he only had 5 incompletions in the game and threw 5 touchdowns. Drake May had a really good game. He was 137.3 in the game. So really impressive there. Those were your top 2 by a decent amount. Now looking at the other end of this scale, Geno Smith had a quarterback rating of 37. That was the worst. With J.J. McCarthy, 37.5, and Justin Fields, 39.6. Those three were your worst. Now, Aaron Rodgers, a bit of a distance between him and Justin Fields, but he had a 58 quarterback rating. And I mentioned that him and Geno Smith both had decent games game one, and Justin Fields too. All of these guys had decent games week one. Week two, they looked horrible. It was quite a difference. It's to see how these, and it makes you wonder what's going to happen going forward. Now, McCarthy looked terrible in game one, but until the fourth quarter, and helped Minnesota win their first game. But then this last game again against Atlanta, he was handled and just had nothing, and got beat up. Just had a rough game and only ended up with a 37.5 rating. So we'll see what happens with some of these guys after this. But those are your quarterback ratings. That's your quarterbacks. Good games by Goff and May. Terrible games by some of the guys that had good games last week. All right, which was a shame, because if I did decide, oh man, Justin Fields looks so good last week, I think I'm going to pick him up and play him on my fantasy team, and he cost me. So learn my lesson there. To stick with, make somebody like Fields prove it more than one game. All right, let's look at next category, and that is the rushing games. See how everybody did there. All right, as far as yards go, Jonathan Taylor this week, 165 yards rushing. Really a good game on 25 carries for a 6.6 yard average. Really impressive. And then Robinson, he looks super good, and he can catch passes just as good. He's amazing. 143 yards for him to be number 2 ball carrier in week 2 on only 22 carries for 143 yards for a 6.5 yard average. James Cook, 132 yards, a good game for him as well. And again, a 6.3 yard average. And then the last one, Kenneth Walker III, who looked horrible last week. Everybody was kind of putting their money that Charbonnet was now going to start taking over, but Kenneth Walker had the big game. Despite Charbonnet having more carries, I think Charbonnet had 15 carries, but for 10 yards. It was terrible. While Kenneth Walker had 105 yards on only 13 carries for over an 8-yard average. So big game for him too. So those are the only ball carriers with over 100 yards in the game. Alvin Kamara had 99 to come close. Now, looking at who did well in the TDs, only one guy, James Cook, who was a big TD guy last year as well. He had 2 touchdowns to lead the NFL last week as far as rushing goes. All right. You notice the leader so far, Saquon Barkley. I haven't mentioned him. He had a bad game last week. And before I go any farther, I should mention that looking at the other end of this, last week, Derrick Henry, number 1 ball rusher, ball carrier. This week, horrible. 23 yards on 11 carries for a 2.1 average. Just what a switch that was. Rough game for him. We'll have to see. I don't know if it was just Cleveland said they could stop him, and they did. Otherwise, Cleveland couldn't do anything else, but they could definitely stop Henry, and he had a rough game. So we'll see. We'll give him that one game because he's too good to be stuffed like that on a regular basis. All right, let's look at the wide receivers here and the passing games for different teams. All right, looking at the receptions this week. This was Jamar Chase by a long ways. He had 14 receptions on 16 targets. And being a Jaguar fan, I do listen to the local media and the local coaches and so forth. Defensive coach was saying, he's going to get his, but we got to slow him down or whatever. They didn't do anything. 14 receptions. They couldn't stop him. It didn't matter if it was Burrow or Browning throwing Chase the ball. He was open the entire game. Like so, he led the NFL in targets with 16 and receptions with 14. The next best was several people with 9 receptions, but that was Jamar Chase. Just dominated. No answer by the Jaguars against him. Looking at yards, well, that was Malik Neighbors. On 9 receptions, he had 167 yards, averaged 18.6 yards a reception. Big game for him. Really some nice passes in this game by Wilson until that last one at the end, toward the end. But Malik Neighbors had a big game there. And then, like I said, Jamar Chase had 14 receptions for 165 yards. Those are your top 2 receivers for yards. There were 12 receivers that had 100 or more yards, including tight end Tucker Kraft had a big game. As far as tight ends go, he had 124 yards on 6 receptions for a 20.7 yard average. Big game for him as well. Some of your regulars are here. Like I said, some of you picked these in top 10, like Neighbors, Chase, St. Brown, Lamb. They were all up here. Nobody except Romo Odunze had 128 yards. He's somebody that you would not have picked so early. And Wan'Dale Robinson, 8 catches for 142 yards. Now, whether he can be this consistent and have this kind of numbers game in, game out, we'll see. Some of these other ones you expect to see up here on a regular basis. All right, let's look at the touchdowns. Well, this is Amon-Ra St. Brown, 9 catches for 115 yards and 3 touchdowns. He led receivers with 3 touchdowns. Big game for him. All right, let's let me see here. Let's look at the defense. If I can get that up here. Hang on a second. All right, we'll look at interceptions. We'll see who led the NFL in interceptions. I don't think anybody had more than 1, though, as far as that goes this week. Several players actually, yeah. Interestingly, there were 24 interceptions in week 2. No one had more than 1. So 24 different players had an interception. Pretty incredible that out of that many interceptions, nobody had more than 1. All right. So I'm not going to go through every name as far as that goes. All right, let's look at tackles for loss. Another category that I like. Tackles for loss. Carl Granderson had 3 tackles for loss for New Orleans Saints against San Francisco, which kept him in the game. The Saints lost 26-21 against San Francisco. Big game for him, though. 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 7 combined tackles, really 3 quarterback hits. He had a big game. Jonah Laulu had 3 tackles for loss as well for the Raiders against the Chargers in a loss, unfortunately for him. He also had 2 sacks as well. Big game. And also 3 quarterback hits. So he had a big game. And then Roquan Smith for Baltimore had 3 tackles for loss against Cleveland. Had 15 combined tackles, 8 solo, 7 assists for 15 combined tackles. Wow, big game. And 3 tackles for loss. Huge. 2 quarterback hits. Big game for him. So those are your leaders in the tackles for loss department. All right, one more category we'll look at, and that is the sacks, the big number on defense. Who was able to sack the quarterback? And that would be Calais Campbell, still getting it done after all these years, had 2 sacks for Arizona against Carolina. He's moving up in that category all time, as well as in tackles for loss. He did have 2 tackles for loss as well, so we'll be looking at that as he gets closer to the number 1 position all time in the NFL. Carl Granderson had 2 sacks, as I already mentioned him for the Saints. So he had the sacks, he had the tackles for loss, he had a big game. And then Daniel Hunter had 2 sacks. There were 6 players that had 2 sacks. And some of these, like Jonah Laulu, also had 2 sacks, as well as the 3 tackles for loss. So both big games for them. So those are some of your players on defense. All right, now Let's look at the numbers overall in the NFL for 2 games and see who's leading the NFL after 2 games. Well, as far as the quarterbacks going, looking at that, it's Lamar Jackson right now, as far as quarterback rating, has a good lead, 136.6 quarterback rating right now. Huge. Not really, he's playing very well. And so is Justin Herbert and Jared Goff. Justin Herbert has 127.8 quarterback rating. Has looked very good. And if they are going to be passing the ball more than they have been, he's going to be easily a top 5 quarterback. And then Jared Goff had 125.1 quarterback rating. Those are your top 3. Jordan Love had 120. So those are the only 4 with a quarterback rating of 120 or better. Now, looking at yards, who's throwing for the most yards? Well, obviously, Russell Wilson has 618 yards. He had 450 in the first game or second game. So he only had 108, 168 in the first game to 450 in the second game. So quite a turnaround, which had everybody questioning whether he should even, whether they should bring in the rookie. But then he showed he still had something left. So we'll see where he comes back in the third game. Now Daniel Jones has been the surprise so far in the NFL. People outside what you typically see as your top 10, Daniel Jones has stood out for Indianapolis. He's second in yards with 588 yards passing right now. He's averaging 9.3 yards per attempt, which is quite high, honestly. And his quarterback rating is 111.1. So he's looking very good right now. He's throwing 2 touchdown passes. We'll look at that in a second. But Justin Herbert's third with 560 yards. And then Jared Goff is fourth with 559. So those are your top 4 right now. But Russell Wilson and Daniel Jones, top 2 as far as yards go. Looking at touchdowns already, in just 2 games, Lamar Jackson and Jared Goff both have 6 touchdown passes. While Lamar Jackson's only thrown the ball for 434 yards in 2 games. So he's not throwing the ball a lot, but when he is, it's touchdowns. By far, his touchdown percentage is much higher than anybody else's. Jared Goff has a touchdown percentage of 9.0. Lamar, which is second best. Lamar Jackson's touchdown percentage is 12.5. So 12.5, you can't, I doubt he sustains this rate, but he did throw for 40 touchdowns, I think, or 41 last year. So he's easily on pace for something like that again. So big game for him as far as his efficiency with the football when he's passing it. Now, looking at interceptions, a negative category, Geno Smith, 1 interception the first game, but 3 this game. So he leads the NFL right now with 4 interceptions. That's the first of the 2 negative categories. And then Cameron Ward sacked 11 times, J.J. McCarthy 9 times to lead the NFL. This, just like last year for Caleb Williams, these rookies, they need to get used to the pace of play. They need to get used to the level of how open their wide receiver is or their receiver in general. And they can't just wait and wait as they may have been able to in college. So anyway, they often lead the NFL in sack categories. And it is Ward and Montgomery with Tagovailoa 8 sacks to be third. So we'll have to see how that goes and if Ward and McCarthy can figure this out and not to get sacked so much. Last year, Caleb Williams, who has 6 already this season, was sacked 68 times. Put him in the top 5 all time. All right, so that's our quarterbacks. Let's look at the running backs. So you have only two running backs right now with over 200 yards. So 2 running backs averaging more than 100 yards a game. And that's Jonathan Taylor on quite a few more attempts, 43 attempts for 236 yards and basically a 5.5 yard average. Really big game for him. Big season so far. He's looked really good as far as that goes. The only negative for him, and that's because Daniel Jones is his quarterback, and it would have been the same if Daniel Jones wasn't the quarterback. and Richardson was. But Jonathan Taylor right now, despite 43 attempts and 236 yards, has 0 touchdowns. He's getting those taken from him often, by Taylor or some other method, but no touchdowns for him. And the same goes with Travis Etienne. They both have receiving touchdowns, though. But Travis Etienne, 30 attempts for 214 yards for a 7.13 yard average, which again begs the question as to why the Jaguars would not want to run the ball more. Tootin looked just as good as Etienne or better, and between the two of them, they could rack up a lot of yards. But anyway, he has 214 yards. He also has 0 touchdowns rushing. So interesting that top 2 players, as far as yards, don't have any touchdowns. Those are the only 2 right now with averaging more than 100 yards per game. Now, looking at the touchdown situation, we have 4 players with 3 touchdowns apiece. And James Cook, who was here last year, is up there. Interesting one, Javonte Williams has had a very good season so far. He's had 151 yards rushing, averaging over 4.5 yards a carry, and he does have 3 touchdowns. So he's looked really good. It was a big question, even who was going to be the running back for Dallas. And I think Javonte Williams has made it clear that he's the guy for Dallas, and which is going to be a huge help for Prescott, so that defenses just aren't keying on Prescott all the time. In the top 4, as far as touchdowns, the other 2 players with 3 are quarterbacks, and that's Jalen Hurts and Daniel Jones, which explains why Jonathan Taylor does not have any touchdowns rushing, because Daniel Jones has 3 of them. So quarterback is sniping off the touchdowns from Taylor. But those are the only only players with 3 rushing touchdowns. That's to lead the NFL. All right, let's look at the receiving game. Right now, as far as receptions goes, it's Puka Nacua with 18 receptions for 221 yards. Jackson Smith-Njigba has 17 receptions. Interestingly, Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb are the next 2 with 16 apiece. But like I said, Jamar Chase had 14 just this last game. So he only had 2 the first game, but 14 to get him right up here in the top 4. But those are your top 4 receivers. All of these guys are number 1 rated wide receivers, which verifies the legitimacy of them being picked as the number 1 receivers. They're all having really good seasons so far. Looking at the yards overall, now Malik Neighbors on 14 receptions has 238 yards to lead the NFL in receiving yards, averaging 17 yards a reception, which is higher than the highest one among the top 10 receivers so far. So 238 yards for him. There's 5 wide receivers. They all are wide receivers that have more than 200 yards receiving. Jackson Smith-Njigba has 227. He's second. CeeDee Lamb, 222. Puka Nacua, 221. And Zay Flowers has 218. Those are your top 5 right now as far as receiving, the only ones with more than 200 yards receiving. So they've been started off quite well. Now, when I'm looking at touchdowns, you've got 4 players with 3 touchdowns. And one of them is a rookie. Emeka Egbuka for Tampa has 3 touchdowns. Kind of interesting because usually it's Mike Evans that gets these touchdown passes, but right now Egbuka has 3. Quentin Johnston for the Chargers has 3. Egbuka has 8 receptions, only has 96 yards receiving right now, but he does have the 3 touchdowns. So I don't know if they're going to continue that style of play with him. We'll see. Like I said, Quentin Johnston, 8 catches, 150 yards with 3 touchdowns. So big difference, same receptions, but difference in the yardage. And then Romo Odunze seems to be showing himself as the number 1 wide receiver for Chicago. 13 receptions, 165 yards, and 3 touchdowns right now. He's been targeted 20 times. That's the highest number of targets for most of these guys, except for Malik Neighbors. and Devontae Adams. So he's definitely being targeted, 13 receptions on 20 targets. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown has 3 touchdowns as well. So those are your top receivers right now. We'll tell you that Tucker Kraft, Zach Ertz as tight ends have 2 touchdowns, just to throw them in there. All right, looking at the defense, as far as sacks go. Oh, no, let's start with tackles for loss. It's Myles Garrett already for Cleveland. 6 tackles for loss. He's looked very impressive. He's definitely going to be a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. And we'll just see. Of course, it's a long way to go, but he's looked good. 6 tackles for loss. And then you have several players with 4. So he's already got a 2 tackle for loss lead on anybody. Looking at the sack department, again, it's 3 players, but one of them is Myles Garrett again. 3.5 sacks apiece. So Myles Garrett for Cleveland, Carl Granderson for New Orleans, and Harold Landry for the Patriots all have 3.5 sacks to lead the NFL in that category. So Myles Garrett right now is making his push for Defensive Player of the Year. Pretty impressive as far as that goes. All right, let's look at some next category. Let's look at the fantasy numbers here and see what we're looking at as far as the players. Looking at the quarterbacks, well, some of this obviously is going to bleed over from what we've talked about, but Lamar Jackson, and you'll notice something here on these quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson's the number 1 quarterback as far as fantasy points, 55.7. Pretty big lead. There's only 3 players with more than 50. Daniel Jones has 52.3 and Josh Allen has 50.6. Those are only 3 quarterbacks with more than 50 fantasy points. So Lamar Jackson's really proving it through the air. I mean, he's not throwing for many yards, but if he continues to throw for so many touchdowns and his rushing continues as it is, he's going to just continue to rack up points, fantasy points. Now, Daniel Jones has been the big surprise. And again, he's passing for more yards, but he's also, actually, he's not running that much, but when he is running, he's got 3 touchdowns. So he's carried the ball 13 times for 28 yards. That's not much, but 3 of those carries have been touchdowns. While Lamar Jackson's racked up 83 yards rushing right now on only 8 attempts. So he's kind of limited his rushing right now, for him anyway, but he's got a big game. Now, Josh Allen is the 3rd quarterback here with over 50 points. He's got 50.6. He's right in the middle there. His yardage is a fair amount, 542, but he got a lot of that in game 1. Same with the yards. He's already carried the ball 20 times for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns, which explains why he's up here. But I think he's going to drop. He's got several games. I don't see him having to put out the kind of effort he did against the Ravens. Now, looking at the top 5, they're all quarterbacks that have done a lot of running. The other, after Jackson, Jones, and Allen, you have Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. And these 2 are running the ball in a much different way. Patrick Mahomes is running for his life, trying to just make a play. He's got 13 carries for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. That leads quarterbacks. You wouldn't expect, not that he can't scramble around, but you would not expect Patrick Mahomes to be leading the NFL in rushing for quarterbacks with 123 yards. And then Justin Herbert is very good at selectively deciding when he's going to run. So it isn't until the 6th quarterback, Jared Goff, do you get a quarterback that's not somebody who also scrambles a lot. So those are your quarterbacks when it comes to fantasy points. Daniel Jones, if you can pick him up, but it's beginning to be clear that he's going to be good, but he was available, I saw, in some of the Yahoo leagues. He's somebody you might think about picking up, especially if you have one of these quarterbacks that have gotten hurt, with several of them having that happen. He's throwing for a lot of yards, and he's rushing for touchdowns, so check him out. All right, let's look at the running backs, see how they're doing. Here you have 6 running backs with more than 40 points. James Cook right now, because of this game on last Sunday has huge. He's number one running back, not huge, doesn't have a huge lead. 47.7 fantasy points. Christian McCaffrey, of course, is up there, 45.9. You would expect those two. The one that would be shocking, and you probably can't pick him up anymore in fantasy, was Javonte Williams. He's third in the NFL with fantasy points as far as running backs go with 45.4. I should say I use the PPR all the time when I'm talking about fantasy points. And then Bijan Robinson, 44.2. Those are your top four running backs when it comes to rushing, all really having good seasons. Christian McCaffrey, he's getting a lot of his points through the air. He has unbelievably, has zero rushing touchdowns, but he does have one receiving touchdown. So that's where he's been able to stay up there. And the difference between him and James Cook, who doesn't even have half the catches that McCaffrey does, but James Cook gets the rushing touchdowns when they get down near the end zone. So he's got 3 rushing touchdowns, which explains why he's up there. Same with Javonte Williams, 3 rushing touchdowns. So right now, those are your top 3, with Bijan Robinson being number 4 in the rushers. All right, let's look at the wide receivers. You have number 1, Puka Nacua, only wide receiver, and honestly, the only, let's see here real quick. Yeah, the only player that's not a quarterback with more than 50 points, fantasy points. He's got 50.7 fantasy points to be number 1 as far as receivers go. Malik Neighbors has 49.8, so those two are really close. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown has 47.7, and Romo Odunze has 47.5. And then there's a big drop-off to number 5. 8 players have 40 or more points. Now, in this group, it's Romo Odunze, who is somebody who wasn't picked as high as some of these other guys, but he's showing that he could be in the top 5 as far as wide receivers go. He's playing a lot of snaps, for his team. He's run almost more routes than most anybody, except for Malik Neighbors. But Malik Neighbors is just, you could see it, that game against Dallas, it went into overtime. He was tired. I mean, every player was tired, but he had run up and down the field the entire game. He had to be exhausted. So Odunze is showing himself to possibly be one of the top 5 wide receivers. We'll see how it goes. And then those are your top 4. And then after that, you have Flowers, Chase, Quentin Johnston, and Deebo Samuels as the other wide receivers with 40 or more points. Those are the top 8, I guess. Deebo Samuels is somebody that's showing he's really being beneficial for Daniels. He's not getting a huge amount of yards receiving, but he's making some big plays when he's catching them, key first downs. And if you saw in the last game, that touchdown pass that he caught, it was just something on a short little pass. They didn't need many yards, but the entire effort was on his part to make it into the end zone for the touchdown. So really big play there. Quentin Johnston's another one you might not expect to see up here, but he's having a decent game, decent season so far. All right, let's look at the tight ends. And right now, you only have 3 tight ends with more than 30 fantasy points, and by a big margin as well. And that's Tucker Kraft for Green Bay, has 34.3 points. Pretty decent lead over Juwan Johnson for the Saints, who has 31.5, and Zach Ertz for the Commanders, who has 30. This is, you notice I didn't mention McBride or Bowers. Now, they're not far behind, but they're number 5 and number 6. So you got 3 people that, Juwan Johnson was sitting on the waiver wire for, until he showed how well he did in the first game. People started picking him up. Excuse me. And he's looked good. And Zach Ertz obviously has been around, and you could have picked him up easily as well. Tucker Kraft is somebody that everybody was talking about a lot, and he has proven that he's been very effective for Green Bay. All right. Those are your top 3 tight ends, only ones over 30. And when I say that, Zach Ertz has 30 points, fantasy points. Next up, Tyler Warren, 26.8. So there is a decent drop off from those top 3, at least right now. So Johnson and Ertz are somebody you can pick up. Ertz, you still could pick up probably. Johnson's been starting to, everybody's wise to him and picking him up. All right, that is our different players to look at. If you're thinking about trading around and so forth, you could maybe dump somebody. If Jalen Hurts is somebody that is easily picked early, he's having a terrible season, but somebody may want to bank that he'll show up still, and maybe you could trade him. I would want to trade him if I could, and see what I could get for him. Same with the running backs. For example, Travis Etienne might be somebody who's up there. He's 9th in fantasy points, but he's, like I said, 2nd in yards, so he's looked good. But the Jaguars in the first game, when he had a lot of the yards, he had a good game in the second game as well, but they just didn't rush the ball as much. But Travis Etienne, in the first game, the Jaguars had 4 running backs playing in the game. Then after that game, they got rid of Tank Bigsby to the Eagles. So now you have 3. And I think as the season progresses, Tootin is going to get the ball more and more and more, and it could be a split backfield. And I think Etienne, while he's hot, if you can get something for him, maybe you need a receiver or whatever, it's an option you might want to try to take. And see if you can pick up something for him. Right now, another one, for example, Josh Jacobs is fairly far down the list. He's 16th running back as far as fantasy points go. Maybe somebody thinks he's just not putting out what they want. Maybe they would be willing to trade for him. We'll see. Ashton Gente is another one. I still have faith that he's going to show up, but right now he's only the 27th best running back. He hasn't had a good game yet. If you watch the game, he had a few times when it looked like he could break through, and he just about did against the Chargers, but they do have a good defense. So we'll see how he does when he plays somebody a little bit different, but I expect to see him improve. He's still got to pick up the offense, which he showed. He made a big mistake in one play in that game. But right now, maybe somebody's willing to dump him. Because he's just not producing, and maybe you could get him cheap. And looking at the receivers, you might be able to get Odunze. I doubt it. Deebo Samuel's somebody you may be able to pick up if you give it a shot. Now, Wan'Dale Robinson might be available in somebody's fantasy league. If you could pick him up, if you think he'll continue on with this progression, I kind of doubt it. If I had him, I'd actually try to sell him as somebody that maybe somebody looks at him and thinks he'll be a big time player. All right. So that's a wrap for this episode. Some interesting players. We'll have some big games in the NFL this upcoming weekend. We'll maybe shake out things a little bit more. We'll see if Kansas City can pull out a win and start racking up some wins there. A big game for the Jaguars against the Texans in a divisional game. See if they can move up to 2-1, or if Houston loses this game, they could be in some big trouble. So there are some big games this weekend. Appreciate you listening. Tomorrow and Friday, I will do the pregame for all the games coming up on Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. So we'll take a look at that on Thursday and Friday. I'll definitely get that podcast out early, so as I'll cover the Thursday night game in that episode. All right. Appreciate it if you like and subscribe. I'm on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. You can find me also, email me at justthestatsnfl@gmail.com. Find me on Facebook, X, Instagram as well. All Just the Stats NFL. So until next time, I am out.